Mayor Vaughn, we are now streaming on YouTube.
May I continue?
Allison, yes, sorry for the interruption.
No problem. Thank you, Mayor Vaughn. I just went through what a disparity study is. So to qualify as a MWBE, a firm must be certified as an MBE, which means they have to be a part of a particular minority group member, which is listed on the presentations, what those member groups are, or they can be considered a WBE, which is a non-minority woman, and those firms have to be 51% owned by either the minority or the non-minority woman. And to qualify for the City of Greensboro's MWBE program plan, you must be a part of our significant market, which is the Greensboro relevant market. And we recognize for those, we have 27 counties that we recognize for our program. And they are listed on the map here that is being shown. So to go over what the MWBE office currently do, we partnership with all of the other city departments. And we are, as I stated earlier, we have a form, and in those forms, they submit to us different types of projects. Some of the projects that we receive are construction projects, construction and repair projects, and that's us working with the engineering and inspection department and our water resources department, a field operation department, or departments that are doing this type of work. So they will submit to us a request. And we review the specifications and the plans that they submit for what is included on that project. That project is then going to the goal setting committee for review. After that point, a goal is set on it, and the department sends out a notice to bid for the project. We provide them MWBE firms who are able to provide services or trades for the project. We attend the pre-bid meetings, and then after the bids are received, we go to the pre-bid meeting, and while we're in the pre-bid meeting, we go over what the goals are for that project, and we also go over what we consider our special instructions, which goes over the good faith efforts. We also attend the bid opening, and at the bid opening, all of the responses, we find that at that time, how many firms met the goals and how many firms did not meet the goals. And from there, we do another review. If the firm has met the goals, then we look over who they're utilizing. If they're in our relevant market, we ask them to submit the D1s if that vendor is the lowest bidder and who the city is considering to award the bid to. If they did not meet the goals, then we go through a good faith effort review and go through that process. After all of that process has been gone through, we then provide an MWBE memo. Though this is the process that we take for construction and repair type projects. But our participation doesn't stop after the project is awarded and it has gone to the prime. After the project is awarded, we then have to make sure that what the prime submitted and the subcontractors that are on that project, that is being followed through, which is where our compliance piece come in. The information is then submitted into the MWBE compliance software, which is the B2G system. And we work with both the primes and the subcontractors on their payments and their compliance. The system allows us to audit those payments that are going on and through that, we also continue to work with the primes and the subcontractors on if there's any issues or anything that is coming up. If during the time the project is going on, there are change orders, then those come back to our office as well for review and to see if there's any of the additional services, if MWBE firms would still have the opportunity to be able to provide even the additional work. So we go through that process from the beginning of when a project is going out into the end and ensure compliance all the way through. Once a project is completed, then we close the project out of our B2G system and the city has completed their main project. We also partner with different departments, which may be any of the departments who are utilizing architects, engineers, survey, or construction managers at risk. And these are Many Brook Services, which is also a general statute. And what we do for those are submitted through our request form as well. We review the specifications. Let me say here, Many Brooks is a little bit different because Many Brook Services are awarded based on the best qualified vendor, not the lowest bidder. It is a qualification-based type solicitation when it comes to Many Brook Services. So when those types of projects are brought to us, we review what is being requested or what services are being requested. And we look to make sure that there are no unforeseen barriers or any unnecessary restrictive language put into those solicitations to make sure that MWB firms will also, again, have the opportunity to submit the bid and will be able to provide those services. When you are doing Many Brooks, as I had spoken earlier about, there are 4 program elements and you have best value where you go through a review and you select a vendor based on qualifications, and they are broken down by being able to give them points. So best value allows you to give points as you are selecting who will be selected to provide those services. As we go through with this as well, once we've reviewed it, we provide a list of MWB firms and we review how the selection is going to be made, meaning the points are going to be distributed. And to do this, the MWBE program plan requires that you have a diversity panel. So we try to find out who is going to be on the panel to ensure, again, that we are doing it in a fair manner that will allow everyone equal opportunity to receive a contract. Once that has gone through that process, we provide the MWBE memo letting everyone know that it did go through our process. We also partner with the City of Greensboro Procurement Services Division for goods and other services. We do more on the services part. Currently, they do not submit goods through our request form, but we do get services that are submitted through the request form. And those services, we go through our regular review of what they are to ensure, once again, that everyone is having the equal opportunity to bid on the project at this point. And we provide them the appropriate MWBE language on if it's going to be submitted as a lowest bid or if it's going to go through the best value review. And we ask that when they are sending out their solicitation, we provide them a list of our MWBE firms, and we ask that they include us on that solicitation so that we know that those firms did receive the opportunity to bid. After the responses, we do review them and we make sure that everything complied, and we issue an MWBE memo. The City of Greensboro, we, just so that you know what I keep saying about the contracts, the MWBE office signs off on every service contract that is routed through. We're looking to make sure this is a check and balance. We're looking to make sure that the service did come through the office and that the MWBE MWBE firms had the opportunity to participate in that service. And we also are looking to make sure that as these contracts are going through, that we can capture any subcontracting opportunities and that they are being transferred into the B2G software. We utilize and we work very closely with the city attorney's office as well. We have a legal representative from the city attorney office that works specifically with the MWBE office. That's Attorney Pressa. She also is assisting us that after we go through good faith efforts, she is the legal representative that if we have to go through a good faith effort appeals hearing, who is there to assist us. She is also, am I going too fast? Oh, I'm sorry. She is also the participant from the city manager's office who is on our MWBE advisory committee. She provides us legal guidance on different things, interpretations from the plan, assists with our own call. We have a big on call type of agreements so that if anything comes up with our on call agreement, she assists us with that. Anything that we need to ensure, and I'm not going to go through all of them, anything that we need, the MWBE office needs to ensure that we are implementing the MWBE program plan as the council has voted for us to do, and to ensure that we're doing it correctly, our city attorney office is there to assist us. I am going to stop here and turn the presentation over to our city manager, who will cover this slide.
Thank you very much, Allison. I appreciate that. So I have mentioned previously, especially at the strategy session that we had earlier on, that in order for us to continue all of the services that Allison had just laid out, but also align them with related functions that the city currently provides through other departments, that I would like to have a department that will really have all of these things work together. Now, this doesn't minimize the importance of MWBE. It doesn't change anything in terms of its priority, because that position will continue to report to the manager's suite in terms of through a director, obviously, to an assistant city manager. And we will continue to just make sure that it's not siloed. MWBE should not be a vertical thing as much as horizontal in any organization. And so in order to be able to coordinate and collaborate all those functions, we're going to create a Department of General Services that will allow activities like procurement, equipment procurement, some of the construction services that we have, professional services. It will also allow us to be able to centralize some of our contracts. I put an asterisk on that because there are certain departments that their contractual needs are very different. That their contractual needs are very different, such as Coliseum, such as water resources, transportation, the GTA, that we want to make sure that we continue to dedicate specific contract employees who engineering and inspections. So it's a big one that will continue to work with Allison's team to make sure that all of these things are coordinated together, but also putting some really primary focus on those major departments where you have significant procurement efforts. So again, this does not minimize the role of MWBE. It actually aligns it with other similar functions to make sure that we provide the best opportunity for minority and women-owned businesses in our city to be able to participate in the program. At the end of the day, it's about encouraging competition, encouraging participation, and making sure that we support small businesses, mostly owned by
City manager, I hate to interrupt, but I received a message that the live stream stopped again.
Oh, good.
Tori, can you check on that?
Yes, ma'am, we're working on it.
Okay.
I wasn't checking my phone. I just saw that message as well.
So, Madam Mayor, this is Sharon. I've gotten about 4 calls sitting here with people who want to listen in and participate, and they can't.
I agree. And
And
that's,
this should have either been by Zoom or something, because some people don't even know how to maneuver our city. Where I said, well, go to the city website. Well, I'm here. Where do I go? So again, it just
I
seems
thought it. Yeah, I don't know if it's printed in the notice how to get on.
but you assume that everybody is sitting around reading email when we're talking about business owners and people who this is very important to and want to be a part of this discussion and haven't heard this and have only heard snippets and are scared to death about what's getting ready to happen. And then they just want to hear. And it doesn't appear that they're not being able to. This is disenfranchisement again. And I don't know how we can fix this. I guess
Well, have
internet
we,
maybe is messed up today.
Tori,
I guess.
have we changed the way that we sign on to a work session that people can watch?
No, ma'am, it's still the same. They would just go to the city website under the city meetings and it will show the live meeting normally. But right now, for some reason, our live stream just will not connect. And I think that's why people are having issues seeing what's going on right this second.
But don't we have a Facebook page?
We do.
I
Well,
thought
then
we
why
could've-
somebody just live stream it from with
Yeah.
the telephone into the Facebook.
Facebook. I thought that's what we were gonna do as well.
It's on YouTube right now and it's still streaming.
Yeah, but everybody don't have YouTube.
No, no,
and
I
some
know.
people
I'm-
don't-
I'm-
Some people
just
don't
saying that's enough.
realize.
I'm just saying
Yeah.
that's another option. I'm not saying that everybody knows how to get on there. I'm just saying that it's there.
Sometimes it'll ask you for subscription and people don't know how to bypass that. You know. So. It's great to have multiple options, just. Oh, Lord Jesus.
So are we having an issue with our internet provider, or what is the issue?
I actually don't know what the issue is at the moment, but we definitely are not able to stream on the city's system. But we are able to on YouTube, like Councilmember Buzzetta said. Question that I have is whether we are also able to see it on
GTN? Oh, Facebook.
Yeah, because if you can see it on Facebook, I think that might be able to help. But we're trying to restart the servers right now, if that would help. So please bear with us.
So the current issue is not with the ISP, it's just with the encoders that handle streaming the meeting out to the public. The ISP within the city facility is up and running. It's just the encoder that's handling streaming the meeting that's currently having some technical issues that GTN is working through.
Are we able to go live on Facebook in addition to YouTube in the meantime?
I can double check on the Facebook stream. Currently YouTube is up and running. I'll double check on Facebook.
Okay.
Well, I hope we can fix, because I don't want to postpone anymore. Well, I'd be better. Daggone thing would work. No, right?
Evan,
Yeah.
I believe that the meeting is being recorded and can be made available to the public. Seems to me that it's probably legal to continue in that way.
I think what we want is people to be able to see it the way they normally access it.
I understand.
Oh, Lord. So, okay.
upon further review, Madam Mayor, I don't think this meeting can go forward without the method of public access, which was provided in the notice, being available.
So Madam Mayor, would that be in the case for the next, if we can't, for the next one, can there be an in-face option with this as well? We doing hybrid council meetings. Can we not go to that?
That's not different, Councilmember Hightower. A hybrid
Okay.
meeting,
Right.
a hybrid, you'd have to go straight in person.
Still
to
have
get
to
a-
go.
so-
Oh, okay.
Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just call.
Hello. I heard something in the
But
background.
you know,
What'd
it
say?
doesn't mean that we couldn't do it that way, just do the work sessions in the council chambers.
Right. I mean, what, yeah, I mean,
Mayor Vaughn,
Yes,
we are talking to eScribe Tech Support now. Please stand by.
I think the live stream is working again.
Yes, ma'am. It looks like it's working again, but I did just get a message from Ronnie that says they're still working through a few issues.
Hello? Site 30?
Looks like it's streaming.
Mayor Vaughn, the live stream is back up.
Okay. Ty, if you can pick up where you left off.
Oh, well, thank you. If you can put the slide back on, I was actually going to wrap up on that. And then if there are questions, I'll be happy to answer them. But I was talking about an opportunity to continue the services that Allison had identified and eloquently spoken to in the previous slides within the MWB program. But rather than just focus on the MWB program and what it does right now, how about we align it with other functional related functional services that the city does right now. This is really more of encouraging broader participation, but also making it possible for the right hand to know what the left hand is doing and bringing about a lot of transparency in the process, especially for small businesses that are mostly owned by minorities and women, as it calls for in the MWB program. So the idea is to, after speaking with different managers and directors and ACMs over the last several weeks that I've been here. The conclusion is that it's best to align the MWB program with these related functions that relate to construction services, procurement, fleet, and contractual services that we currently provide that are not currently housed in one place. All of these are throughout the city, but it's very important to be able to pull this together and have someone who can actually lead and guide that process to a successful end. One thing we can agree to is that what we have right now, even though it has worked and to a degree successful, it has not been as effective as we would want it to be. And this is an opportunity to at least allow some degree of effectiveness, and also making sure that we engage the advisory committee in the process, not just in the process of implementing the program itself, but also in the process of hiring who the director of general services will be, and that it will focus strictly on these three activities of MWB, procurement, and contractual services that we have as a city. So next slide. And then today's presentation, obviously, it's really setting the stage. So we will, when we come back again at the next conversation, we'll kind of share with you what that organizational structure will look like, and that it will continue to report directly to the CMO's office. But we will also discuss in detail the goal setting process that was discussed at yesterday's advisory committee meeting. And we're going to also further speak to the good faith efforts process. Allison, I can turn this back to you to take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, City Manager. Okay, to move forward from there.
May I ask, excuse me, Ms. Allison, I apologize, Mayor. So are we just sitting here listening and not engaging or querying about anything in the
Well,
process?
I think what the city manager requested is to go through the program and then circle back for questions.
Okay, sure.
Okay, I'm going to do a quick overview about MWBE goal setting. As the city manager have stated, we will come back on a second session to go in more detail, but just to give you an overview about goal setting. Goal setting is a general statute, is North Carolina General Statute 143, 128.2. And the part that most of us are familiar with is the prior to the solicitation of bids, which I stated earlier on, where the good MWBE office is always reviewing information prior to solicitation. This is where, even though this is for the goal setting, we do that for all services. But prior to the solicitation of bids, we go through the good faith effort. We take into consideration feasibly for minority business to be able to submit a successful bid or proposal to be able to be utilized on the City of Greensboro projects, construction related projects, or any other projects that allow subcontracting opportunities. Our MWBE program plan, where we put our weighted goals, which is when we receive the goal setting spreadsheet, and we set goals based on the different trades that are available, along with the number of MWBE firms that are available to provide the services for that project. A quick overview of goal setting, which I kind of already stated. They submit the goal setting request, the project manual, we do a spreadsheet, the MWBE office, which we refer to as the MWBE team, and concert with the departments, we review the project in depth to make sure that all opportunities that are available, we're capturing to be able to put goals on. Then it is taken before the goal setting committee. It's discussed with those on the goal setting committee. And we then determine if that project will go through a bifurcated or non-bifurcated process, and we vote on that. Just so that you understand bifurcated and non-bifurcated, on April of 2014, the city put into place a bifurcated bidding process to strengthen the good faith effort requirements. There's a lot of words about what that means, so I'm just going to do it the quick, simple way. When a firm is bidding on a construction project that has goals on it, they are to submit at bid time 2 envelopes. One envelope contains their good faith effort that they've done for the project to meet the goals. And then the other envelope is their bid proposal or their bid amount. If we're using the bifurcated process, when they submit the bids and we're using the bifurcated process, we open the good faith effort envelope first. So we review if the firms have met the goals. Those firms that did not meet the goals, when we open those envelopes, that kicks off the good faith effort review at that time. No bid amount is open at that time until we've gone through all of the bids and gone to see if they truly did good faith efforts. However, when we use the non-bifurcated process, we open both envelopes at the same time. We open the good faith effort envelope and the bid amount envelope. And at that point, we look at who is the lowest bidder. If the lowest bidder met the goals, then we verify that they've utilized the correct MWBE firms in our relevant market. And we ask for the D1s and we go on and move the project forward. However, if the lowest bid did not meet the goals, then we go through the good faith effort process as well. But we will go more in detail in our second session about that. So what does good faith effort mean? Good faith efforts means that a bidder shows that they have actively and aggressively sought to achieve the applicable goals of the goals set for a project. That is what good faith efforts mean, and the other part I've already covered. So at this point, we're at questions.
Sharon? Sharon?
Sorry, I had to get unmuted. Well, I think I hear several things that, and being able to have to sit at the end of the class, hold your hand up. I'm not sure if I remember everything. I tried to write some things down. But one of the things I'm asking about this moving to general services, which is like the program in Charlotte. So it appears to me it's more of a watered down approach, because I think we spend a lot of money in water and sewer and Coliseum and those construction things, as opposed to fleet maintenance. I'm unclear about how that's gonna help MWBE as well. So I'm a little concerned that while we say it's a priority, maybe I'm not understanding the structure of this either, because will MWBE then be, will MWBE then become a two-step level up reporting, or will it go down to 3 steps before it actually reports? Because it's not going to report obviously directly to the city manager. So I guess I need to understand some of that, but I also have some additional questions. And I've got some of that wrote down. I don't want to take it off, but I would like that addressed first, because I know some others probably have some questions, especially around good faith and the program elements.
Thank you very much for your question, Councilmember Hightower. First of all, this is not like the program in Charlotte. I'll be very clear about that. While the program in Charlotte is also called Department of General Services, is absolutely significantly different from what I'm talking about here. The program in Charlotte doesn't even call it MWBE. It's an MSWBE, and it is called Charlotte Business Inclusion. And it has procurement within it, but it also is within a department that has construction and engineering and everything related to, for example, that's the department that issued the bid for the Charlotte streetcar system. And they constructed it. They actually, because that's where the chief engineer sits. So it's not the same as what we're proposing here. What we're proposing here is pretty much building on the recommendation that I believe council has reviewed before, that looked at what our peer cities do when it comes to MWB. There is no city that actually has an MWB program functioning on its own, whether as an office or as a department. It's usually combined and in alignment with similar functions. And so calling it general services, as they call it in Charlotte, is probably the only similarity you will find. In Charlotte, Department of General Services has almost 500 employees within it, because it includes people who construct tracks and buildings and facilities and things like that. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is making sure that the MWB program rather is an alignment with other things like procurement that goes out of construction, for example, or contracts that may be going out of the Coliseum, or contracts that may be going out of other departments that, yes, right now, Allison may be involved one way or the other, but the fact is that sometimes the legal department is only aware of some of these efforts when it comes to the end of it and not necessarily at the beginning of it. When you bring all of this under the leadership of a department director, what you do is that you prioritize that process, not necessarily silo it, but you make sure that just like the Department of Transportation or the Department of Field Operations Department right now reports to different assistant city managers in the CMO's office. That's the way this is going to function. It's not pushing down, it's not minimizing it, it's pretty much aligning it while it continues to every director reports to this office. And that's going to continue to be the goal of this. Right now, the program reports to an assistant city manager who is in the city manager's office, and that's the same thing that will continue to happen.
So what happens to the construction contracts? Because that is the bulk of what we do and have done. While I maybe have some agreement that it's not working to the degree that I think it should be working. But I think that's tied to the fact that within the recommendations that came from the previous disparity studies, I would say to you, probably only a third have even been accomplished. I'm sitting here waiting for the small business enterprise to get passed. It should have been passed 4 years ago. I'm sitting here waiting for professional services to have goals that I know goal training has occurred, but it hasn't been implemented. Debundling has not been done since we debundled the security contract a few years ago. And when it came up for RFP this time, oh yes, it's being debundled, but it wasn't. So what we did, we have put a minority subcontractor in a fiscal bind. Because if we had debundled it appropriately, that individual could have bid on certain elements and not had to wind up bidding on it all. And so I think we're setting people up to fail. That concerns me as well. Joint ventures are not being done. Vendor rotation is not being done to the level it should be done. And so all those recommendations that we saw came out of that disparity study that said, okay, if you do X, Y, Z, and this, this can help. And I understand the understaffing of the office was probably how some of this may have gotten missed, but we're stepping up staff. And I think that's appropriate. But if we're not even doing a third of what we were told we should be doing, we can't be effective at all. And that just, I just wanted us to give it a chance to make sure we are giving it our all. I hear you loud and clear, I do, and but I'm saying to you, from what I'm hearing in the contracting community, what I've read in the disparity study, what I read in the program plan, and I've read all 800 some pages of both. And so that we just aren't implementing. And I think implementation is a critical component of us making sure that the MWBE process works. For those who are hoping and counting on being a part of getting government work. And that's what this boils down to. We can't control the private sector, but we have say in the government work that we offer to people based upon having a legal MWBE program, thanks to Cross and Rick versus the city of Richmond some years ago. So I'll kind of just stop there, but I know the good faith effort is a problem and we need to tighten that. We didn't do that. That was a recommendation also in the disparity study. We haven't tightened that up. So I think we really ought to concentrate and focus on first making sure we get these program elements in place and handled the way they can. If it still goes under general services, I'd like to see the construction contracts go along with it. Because I think all of this work aligns itself together if we implement it correctly.
I know, Councilmember Hightower, you are not asking a question, but I think we're on the same page when it comes to that, frankly. I also don't want us to get into another disparity study and have all those recommendations and just, we spend so much money on these studies, you know, and the recommendations are there. Are we going to come back 5 years from now and do another disparity study and still repeat the recommendations? But I think it's about leadership, starting from the city manager's office, but also making sure that whoever sits in that role as a director is someone who is well-versed with what happens with MWBE program, not just from professional services point of view, but also from construction services point of view, because that's really where the big, the big projects are. And so I think we're on the same page when it comes to wanting to make sure that we get the best information out to be able to empower minority women business enterprises in our city and really allow them to function in a sustainable manner and in a profitable way, as long as they exist in the city. And also, frankly speaking, allowing them to be able to foster smaller businesses through their own successes too. So I think we're on the same page, and fully, the goal is that when you have a director in place, you give them this disparity study, and you say, we have some recommendations in here that need to be implemented step by step. And like I committed to you in our conversation, and even in my conversation with the mayor as well, is that just like we receive regular updates on public safety or we receive regular updates on weekly claims, we should be having regular updates on MWBE participation. And that will allow me to be able to send you regular emails and say, hey, this week or the last 2 weeks, this is really what is going on. And part of that is also having a quarterly workshop for minority-owned, women-owned businesses too. That allows them to be able to know what procurement activities will be coming within the next 60 to 90 to 120 days. Again, it's about transparency, it's about accountability,
right,
as holding people accountable, but also setting expectations. So all of these things may not be possible right away, but as we put the right leadership and team in place to strengthen what we have right now, I think we'll begin to see the needle move in terms of effectiveness. I see that Michelle has a hand up, Mayor, but I just wanted to echo some of what Councilmember Hightower said. I think for the most part, we're on the same page. We want to get it working and we want to get it to work well.
So I did want to recognize that we have Michelle Clark Jenkins on our call and that she's with Griffin and Strong. And Michelle, I don't know if you had an opportunity to review some of the changes that our city manager spoke about, but we'd love to hear your thoughts.
So again, thank you, Madam Mayor and council persons. No, we haven't had a chance to review any of this. However, what I can say is across the country, these departments report very differently. You know, there are some places where they report to finance, some places where they're part of procurement. The city of Atlanta, they are a relatively standalone. They report directly to the mayor as the Office of Contract Compliance. There are a number of different ways in which they report in. But I think what's very important with these departments is that the end result is that you really want to begin to see the results of diversity in procurement. So what's critical is that you have full-time equivalent staff. So you don't want staff who has divided responsibilities in this area. You know, you need staffing that this is what they do. They do contract compliance. You need a robust contract compliance system. There are 5 major steps to contract compliance. You want to make sure you have the staffing and the resources to do that. You also want to make sure that there are performance reviews, that whoever's doing this and whatever departments they're reporting to. So if they're reporting to procurement or they're reporting to finance or wherever, or general services, that there is some kind of accountability and measurement in terms of their performance. So we found that it's less where they're reporting as it has to do with the effectiveness of the program in that umbrella. And so, you know, we've seen where the closer it is to the mayor's office or the city's manager's office, the more autonomous, maybe the more power that department has. But then when they're not a part of procurement, they sometimes get information related to procurement activities. And so there's, you know, there are pros and cons for being in both positions. But again, resources, staffing, accountability through performance reviews. You want to see whatever that's, however they're reporting is also institutionalized and not so much based on, well, who has the job today? Because we've seen that too, where there's a really good performance because whoever's in charge of that area, this is their focus. But as soon as they leave that job, there's a downfall in terms of the numbers. So, you know, of course, the numbers always tell the test. And then you may have to do some reorganization if the numbers don't come through. That's part of what some of the recommendations may be in order to get more diversity in procurement.
Very interesting. So, Mayor, I have a question for Ms. Jenkins, if that's appropriate. I don't know. But one of the things I didn't hear you say as part of all that process, which I think we're kind of tiptoeing around, it is that good faith effort piece. Because I think that's critically important, no matter whether it's procurement or contract and compliance. But if they have figured out the system and all they do is add to the 50 points and they have not done proper good faith efforts, as you talk about in the past study, I think it's section 8 that you talk around good faith efforts, then I'm not sure how we can, we need to get that changed. And I think they spoke to that in the past, and I don't think we've adhered to that at all. And I know some of it is state, I understand state reg, but I think there's things you suggested locally we could have done to kind of help move some of this along as well. And for me, that's an issue, and I know it's a big issue that came up at the last council meeting. Some people probably are mad at me because I didn't vote for a contract because it gave a goal of 15% of M and came out with 0.6. Yet they said, well, we got our 50 points. Bam, thank you. So that's something that needs to be helped to include it, I think, in what you just said. Am I wrong?
Well, I think you're going to another issue. One is the reporting lines, which is what I was addressing. But yeah, okay. You've got to have really strong program elements. And you do have a really strong drafted program plan if you follow it. So your program plan is, if you go look in there, you've got a lot of the elements. Specifically with regard to good faith efforts, I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding about the good faith efforts requirements and how they can be applied. You do have some leeway in terms of how you look at those so that they're not just, well, I checked the box and here's 50 points. You have a lot of leeway, both in two angles. One is that there, and this is what we recommended, that some of the good faith efforts checklist not be allowed to count unless you've achieved some others. So there are lots of things you can do to adjust those checkpoints so that they are not just, well, let me check a box. And as you know, we did the state study, and the state is rearranging theirs so that there are, becomes a lot less of a check off as it is, did you really demonstrate good faith efforts? You also have a non-discrimination policy. So when you have, for example, if you have, let's say you have a 20% goal, and that includes areas where there is substantial MWB participation, and other primes come in with a lot of participation, and then you have a prime who says, oh, I couldn't find anybody. That really should trigger an investigation, and you have that ability to trigger that investigation, to ask a lot of questions and not just say, well, I've checked off my points and I'm going to pay people prompt pay, but yet I didn't consider seriously MWBE proposals, or I rejected MWBE proposals without an explanation. So you do have a fairly well-crafted plan, again, if it's followed. There are some aspects we've been talking about. One of them was, there seemed to be some misunderstandings about how to calculate goals. So we went back and we had a long conversation just before Christmas about how to properly calculate goals. And I know that Alice and her team are going back to doing some tweaking on how that's been done. So it's really taking everything you've got and making sure that it's effective and operating the way it should.
And you
Okay,
said
now,
one thing, I'm sorry, Nancy, she said one thing that kind of bothers me, draft program plan. So are you all telling me, as much as I've been pushing and fighting for this, that you all apparently never reviewed the final plan? So I'm wondering, staff and legal and city manager, do we even have, Chuck, can somebody talk to me? Maybe it's just that they just never saw the final plan, because I know a lot of work was put into that. So that should have been something that they should have been able to review, I think, not just a draft, but a final review as well. And so I'm a little disturbed. I'm not trying to go back in history, because obviously all the history players aren't around, but nevertheless, I think that's something we need to make sure is done correctly, first and foremost, because go ahead, I'm sorry.
Let me just correct. When I used the term drafting, I meant how it was written. I didn't mean to imply that you have a draft. We participated in commenting on the plan. We did not draft the plan, but we commented on the plan. We did not see the final plan before it went through, but we did have an opportunity to put our comments on several previous drafts.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Justin?
Thank you. Ms. Clark-Jenkins, you just made reference to recommendations that you've shared with staff in terms of strengthening or identifying areas where there's latitude with regard to good faith efforts. And obviously, kind of good faith efforts is a term of art. And so, I guess Mr. Manager or Ms. Staten, I'd be interested to know kind of the status of city staff evaluating those recommendations and whether or not we're intending on implementing them or agree or disagree with them. Because for context, not as certainly everyone on the call is aware, you can't require or direct a contract to someone on the basis of their race. So the good faith effort is a really significant, important thing. working to increase minority and women participation.
This is Allison with the MWBE office. We are utilizing good faith efforts, and we're utilizing it as it is to the law. We go through the process. The bigger part that Ms. Jenkins spoke about is how the goals are set and our goal setting process. We are doing the goal setting and setting goals on the project and going through the process correctly. The key may come in when a goal is not met and the good faith effort process, which is a process that occurs after you set the goals and a project has closed. So I hope I answered your question to that.
Yeah. Well, with my lawyer ears, I'm hearing a possible disagreement as to whether or not there's latitude to go further or do something different with regard to good faith. Given, if there is in fact a disagreement, and it sounds like there is, I think it'd be helpful for the council to know what the recommendation is from Mrs. Clark Jenkins, what staff's position on it is, so that the council can provide direction if appropriate. And obviously the city attorney's office would be expected to opine on that. Because again, I mean, that's a major area, at least in my understanding, and Ms. Clark Jenkins, Ms. Staten, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, that's a really, really big deal if we can do more on good faith that might increase the likelihood of minority participation.
Yeah. So 143, 128, 2 is the area that sets forth those 50 points, and it requires bidders to undertake good faith efforts using that 50-point system. However, it also authorizes that the public entity may require that additional good faith efforts be taken as indicated in its bid specifications. So things like, instead of just saying, well, I got 50 points, however I got them, you can say, well, you don't get prompt pay unless you also do, you solicit firms, or you don't get prompt pay unless you make plans available. So it does allow you to do a couple of things. One, which is to add some additional things to that good faith efforts. It also allows you through your non-discrimination policies to ask questions about if there's something doesn't look right. The idea is you're not just checking a box and saying, well, because what's happened is, primes basically, when you say here's 50 points, they say, well, how can I get 50 points without really doing anything? So what is allowed under the state statute is that you can ask for more things than just what's there. You can rearrange them. There's an ability, because of particularly the non-discrimination policies, to ask a lot of questions about whether somebody really did undertake good faith efforts or whether they just went through the motions. So it is a contract compliance function. In other words, it's not just, well, I saw the box were checked. And I think that's the important distinction.
That makes a lot of sense. And I would, respectfully ask staff, since we're not doing that, what's the timeline for us doing it? And if there is no timeline, what's the reason for us not doing it? I understand there might be legal reasons and there might be a difference in interpretation of the statute, but I think it'd be helpful for the council to understand that if there is a conflict that exists between staff and Griffin is strong on the point.
So
I don't think there's I'd just like to add, I don't think there's a conflict between staff and Griffin and Strong. I think we see it the same way. What I think Michelle is pointing out is that under the statute, there are ways to, there's some fluctuations kind of within the rule. Okay, so each of there's 10 listed items that count as good faith. The definition of those items is subject to a bit of flux. And also whether or not all 10 get 10 points is a matter that each city can make adjustments to. In fact, we had the prompt pay provision, for example, we had added additional points to that so that you ended up getting 20 points for doing prompt pay. And that was because at the time staff felt that contractors weren't doing enough in the way of prompt pay. Now, in looking at the result, you see that, that has maybe resulted in people being able to get 50 points with just doing prompt pay and a couple of other things. And so maybe we need to go back. In fact, the recommendation we got yesterday from the coordinating committee was to go back to just 10 points per, so that they have to do at least 5 of these. And what the other point about what Michelle, so I'm saying the staff has looked at this and tried to figure out how to make the sort of changes that she's suggesting. And it's come down one way in the past and maybe moving in another way in the future. It's a really a judgment call to some extent.
Yeah,
But the
I
extent
agree
to which
with
we
that.
don't disagree at all about what.
Yeah, I think we agree on that, Councilmember Outling. The concern we had more than good faith efforts, because we didn't see as that many issues regarding good faith efforts. Ours was in one of the major conversations we had was in how the goals were being set. That was our biggest concern, is that the goal process, we wanted to make sure that was a little more objective process than it has been to this point. And so we met with Allison and her team before Christmas. And so we have not gotten an update on that, Allison, but she said we would have one before we came back with the next session to talk about how they have adjusted their goal setting process.
I remember.
If I might say though, Councilman, I would just say that since that review by Griffin and Strong, we have had some cases where it appeared that this good faith standard was being complied with in sort of a mechanistic fashion that raised some concerns. And so we had some discussion about that yesterday in the session with the coordinating committee. And I think some of this needs to be viewed as as a recent basketball coach described, live action. I mean, it's things that are happening as we look at these contracts and as we adjust to the environment to try to get to the numbers, which is, as Michelle pointed out, is really the acid test.
And going on that point in terms of the goals, the way I understand the goals work, it's what does professional staff reasonably expect should be the degree of minority participation based on their professional analysis and judgment looking at the market. And so I will say, as a result, when there are situations where goals are not met, it is noteworthy. And to me, it appears that it can happen for a couple of reasons. Either it was a bad goal or some other reason that the goal was not met, including that people, in fact, weren't operating in good faith or they weren't just successful. And so with that, I would be interested to know, because we get lots of individual contracts that we approve and we get the MWBMO as to whether it's met the goal, like in the aggregate, in the total, to what degree or what percentage are we actually meeting the goals? Does anyone have that information? I mean, as like a baseline of like, how well are we doing as compared to what professional staff thinks that we should be doing because it's available in the market?
Do we have that information available, or will staff be able to go back and compile that?
Sorry, Allison, we can't hear you, but I think you're struggling with your me. Well, we will provide that. What I also want to share is that I love the conversation we're having on goals and good faith effort, but we also plan to come back and do a more in-depth discussion with you on that very subject. However, though, we're also making notes and we will come back and share with you, good response to that.
Well, then that's helpful. In that case, I respectfully ask that when we have that more extended discussion on goals, we receive that information so we actually can look at these things in context. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You?
Yes, following the conversation here, just a couple of things. First, for Ms. Staten, as part of my continuous learning, I'll be in contact with you regarding more details about MWBE. And secondly, regarding the good faith effort, am I correct in what I'm hearing? And you may have already answered this question for me, but the minority participation targets are statutory, as is the good faith effort. But when it comes to the good faith effort being statutory, it also provides the local government municipality, being Greensboro, the ability to either be more conservative or more liberal in its application of the guidelines of it. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm gonna jump in. Hi, Jasmine Presser. So basically, under the state program, there are 10 good faith efforts. Cities are required to assign at least 10 points to each of those efforts. And we're statutorily required to the city may not require a contractor earn more than 50 points. What we can do is assign greater point values to things that we think are more important. And we have done that in the past. We're currently doing that. We're doing that with providing financial assistance, because at the time we thought it was important to provide financial assistance to minority and women-owned businesses. We also assign 20 points to joint ventures. We think that's important. Unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that. One of the issues that has come up recently is that, some of the primes are satisfying the good faith effort requirement without doing so many of the good faith efforts. So I discussed this, yes, because by statute, you only need 50 points. And so what we've discussed is reevaluating our point system and modifying it so that you can't do like 3 efforts and collect all 50 points. And we also have a requirement that in order to earn certain good faith efforts, you have to get contacts, which is the first effort, reaching out to minority and women. So if you don't get that, there are several other good faith efforts you can't get. But under our point system, we currently allow primes to earn up to 155 points. And that's something we should reconsider. I'm happy to meet with Allison as early as next week. I've discussed this with Chuck earlier this week. We discussed this yesterday at the advisory committee meeting, and that's something we certainly need to take a look at. Perhaps we don't give 25 points for providing financial assistance. We lower that to maybe 15, or the problem with making all of them 10 is that then the vendors will only do the easiest thing.
Right.
So then we can actually we have the purview to set minimum thresholds and in those categories, so that those are just, in a sense, requirements in order to be in the game from the standpoint of good faith effort, if they're not hitting those participation targets.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part?
If they're not hitting the participation targets, then we have the ability to set minimum thresholds, as you were mentioning, the 10 points here, there, or the 15. We can set some minimum parameters, thresholds that have to be met before a good faith effort can even be considered. We can put into those categories whatever we wish.
No, so the state sets the minimum.
Okay.
The state has outlined 10 good faith efforts. Those are our 10 good faith efforts.
Right.
We provide guidance on how the primes can achieve these good faith efforts. We're actually here to assist. One of the good faith efforts is working with the MWBE office, and you'd be surprised how many primes don't reach out to us. But we can add values. We can add values, and we can do things like add an additional requirement that, if you don't make contacts with, we go through and we determine what scopes of services are available for MWBEs to perform. We determine what MWBE firms are available to provide those services. We provide that list to the primes. We require that they reach out to them. They must at least contact them and notify them of this opportunity to participate. If they don't do that, they don't meet contacts, and then they can't get other good faith efforts, which is one of the things that we put in place. But on top of that, we do need to look at the values that we've placed. Some of the values are too high. I'm looking at it right now, and I think that we should go through and have a conversation about what's important to us now, look at some of these good faith efforts outcomes and see how, not everyone, but you always have that one or two bad apple that they find a way to try to, take advantage of the system. But I will say that a lot of the primes, not all of them, actually do try to achieve a majority of the good faith efforts. But we're starting to see an issue with someone just trying to get the 50.
Right. So I can see it's kind of like water. It's the path of least resistance, but they're only able to do that because we've allowed that to occur. So I fully support having a look at this and seeing where we stand and what we can do to tighten it up so that we do get better, truer participation or good faith efforts that come out, and the awarding of these contracts can be more equitable. Thank you.
Thanks. So I think we have a lot of questions to be answered for the next follow-up. And I wouldn't necessarily want to wait until that next meeting because it's not for a few weeks off. So, if we could get the follow-up in writing, we may decide to move that meeting up. I do like one thing. I liked a lot of things that Michelle mentioned, but specifically about when it comes to good faith, tying one item to another. So,
Right.
I think that makes it, I think that helps cut down on the shortcuts. I think that's what you're trying to achieve. So,
Mayor, I know you were trying to move on, but I did want to, and they can bring this question back maybe,
Okay.
and answer back. But for the things you said about, I'd like to see the list again of good faith and the current points attached to that, so that in that discussion of looking at, okay, maybe this one has too many points, it's got 20. Why has it got 20? Maybe, and see how those were allocated, and see how then some are tied to some. For example, if they got 15 points or whatever, 20 points for allowing quick pay, but at the end of the contract, or when the contract's awarded, there's no subs on it, no MWBE on it, does that 20 points get subtracted back? Because
Right.
then they can't accomplish that. So that's a question I have.
Well, and
so
I think we could get, Sharon, I think that's an easy ask. You're just asking what does that good faith, what are those topics and what are the point values? I mean, I think we could get those pretty quickly.
Yeah, so I would like to see those. And then I'd love to know in the data is like these program elements that are already listed, these recommendations, how many times have we really done it? Do we know how many contracts had joint ventures? How many contracts are doing vendor rotation? The most easiest thing to do in some of these is like in landscaping and grass cutting and so forth. If you've got MWBEs who, that seems to be a real popular area, if we rotate, and at one point that was being done under neighborhood development. I don't know what's happening there now anymore, but is that something? Because that's a way to make sure we are being inclusive. So I'd like to hear some of that. And I really wouldn't want to, I guess July is not that far away, to kind of hear some of that, because that is a concern. And my final concern, Mayor, is I want my SBT pass, because I put that on the delegation over 3 years ago, and it didn't go through in 2015 when we tried it, but we got very optimistic in responses and results with it going through. And I just want us to see us try to get, because that is a recommendation. It's a huge one. And I think that it would really make a difference if we had that in place. And one of the other last things I'll say when I go talking about goals, what I heard about goals is that we weren't putting goals on contracts under 30,000. I think those are the ones that probably could fall into some kind of vendor rotation. I'd love to hear around some of that as well. Because I know we can't look at every single solitary contract, But at the same time, that's where probably a lot of the opportunity lies, right there. One vendor could, paint some home, 30,000, 35,000. That's easy. Oh, we got this painter. We'll use him this time. Oh, well, now we rotate. We got paint. We use this one. So I think those are opportunities that are being missed, totally missed. And I understand our staff doing all they can, and I applaud them and commend them because that office has been understaffed for too many years and under budget. And it's only now finally starting to come to the level where it should have been a long time ago. And so there's no criticism on staff, but I think we just have to make sure the right leadership is leading and looking at that and focusing on that. Because before we throw the baby out with the bathwater, we need to make sure the baby has been washed completely. And those program elements, some of them have not been done and vetted. That's my concern.
Councilwoman Hightower, I will share with Allison and her team. We've redrafted the Good Faith Efforts Forum for the state of North Carolina. And one of the things we have added some language that says a mere willingness to do some of the aspects of good faith efforts will not get them the points without having substantial MWBE participation. So I will share those new forms, Allison. I think the state's already issued them, but they've given us permission to share them with some other local agencies. So I'll share them with you, how we've redrafted those forms.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you. So let's move on to our next item, which would be a review of our water and sewer policy.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of council. I'm going to go ahead. I have a short slide presentation, and then I welcome a conversation as it relates to the content. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I'm Mike Borchers, the Director of Water Resources, and it's a privilege for me to take a little bit of time to talk about our current water, sewer, and extension policy, and then, of course, open it up to a conversation and any questions. So our current policy, it's a 2012 policy. It was revised in 2014. That is what governs how we look at the extension of water and sewer services. But I'd like to step back a minute and talk about how we got to where we're at now. Originally, where you look back in 1968, we had an agreement with the county, and this agreement spanned almost 40 years, from 1968 to 2010, and it was called the City and County Water and Sewer Agreement, or Sewer Line Agreement. And it served us fairly well. Matter of fact, it supported our underlying growth policy, which was to extend water and sewer service with the clear understanding at the appropriate time we would be able to annex in that particular area. Well, what happened? Well, in 2011, as all of you know, we had changes to city-initiated annexation laws. And it made city-initiated annexation, not voluntary, but city-initiated annexation efforts very unpredictable, very difficult and costly. And it basically, as you look at those sub-bullets, it undermined our ability to continue with our growth policy that we had at that point in time. Also, there was a provision in there that a protest petition could be submitted. And if you got 60% of respondents that signed on to that protest petition, they could basically disqualify the city-initiated annexation effort. And then that time, effort, and energy, of course, would be rendered naught. Not to mention, if we had already extended water and sewer service into that area, we would lose the ability to be able to grow our city, and yet they would have the benefit of continuing to have water and sewer service. So that's how we've got to where we've got our 2012 but revised 2014 policy. Now, if we look at it, this policy that we have now, it's council approved as far as a water sewer service area. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute here. And it's also got growth tiers associated with it. And what is the underlying foundation associated with it is that annexation is required to receive water and sewer service. And then, of course, there are approved exceptions to that. So if you're outside of tier 1, and tier 1 is the area where we can readily provide all city services, but you're within the water sewer service area, there are provisions based on either public necessity or economic development or limited access to existing adjacent water and sewer lines. Then you would have that provision to be able to, by policy, to be able to connect on. Now, of course, council has the prerogative at any point in time to evaluate any project inside or outside the water sewer service area to determine whether or not it is appropriate to go ahead and extend water and sewer service. Now, of course, there's benefits and there's our limitations to our current policy. The benefits that you can see up there is it was well planned. It's a wise use of our finite resources for the benefit of all of our ratepayers that pay to maintain and sustain and to help us grow our system. It helps with capacity management. You know, as far as being able to, we can strategically look at how we expand our water and sewer service with the understanding that we will continue to be able to grow the city. It's again, it ties well with the other departments as far as municipal services. You know, when we look at a particular area, we extend water and sewer service, knowing that it's going to be within a tier 1 or a tier 2 or a tier 3. The city can position itself to make sure that, again, at the appropriate time, all the rest of the municipal services can be provided. It also complements and supports, of course, our comprehensive plan. And it specifically the current growth policy by annexing as requests are made and services can be provided, as well as the big 6 guiding principles, which are fill in our framework, creating great places, becoming car optional, prioritizing sustainability, building community connection, and growing economic competitiveness. And I'll talk a little bit more about that last one in shortly. And then the other benefit, of course, is it accommodates economic development. And we all, of course, have seen the benefits of that with, of course, the mega site, of course, PTIA with the airport with Boom. And then hopefully we'll continue to see some very good economic development in our area as a result of the wise decisions those before us have made in leveraging and extending our water and sewer service. Now, it's got limitations, of course. So those limitations are water and sewer services are not shared with residents in unincorporated areas in small towns in Guilford County. Again, especially if we're unable to annex and grow the city. Growth is governed through annexation to receive water and sewer service. Again, they're like hand in hand, they're inseparable per the policy and as designed. And it does not support residential development projects without annexation. So unless it meets one of those 3 exceptions that I had mentioned about public necessity, economic development. Now, economic development will allow as if it's a mixed use plan that's submitted and it has less than or equal to 25% of a residential element to it. So there is a little bit of residential can be submitted as part of a mixed use plan if it's tied to economic development and meets the city's, of course, ED threshold. And then the last thing is again, there's limited access to existing adjacent utility lines. We've had, of course, properties where we've had a failed septic system or a failed well, and they have been adjacent to utility lines. And as long as the request is not for a water connection that's, as long as it's not greater than 1 inch water connection or greater than a 4-inch sewer connection, then we can accommodate it per the policy. So with that said, here's basically the water sewer service area boundary you can see with the growth tier map. And what I'd like to point out when I'm looking at this is specifically the water sewer service area boundary basically shows where we believe we can reasonably extend water and sewer service. So the whole outside red line is where we at this point in time feel like water and sewer services can reasonably be extended. So you can see, of course, there's to the north, there's some to the south, there's some to the east and southeast, and even some to the west. So you can see those are particular areas. Now, as our city grows and as our water and sewer system expands, the potential for this area to grow is there as well. But again, it's a city council prerogative, and city council ultimately is the one who approves the sewer service area boundary. Real quick, growth tier 1, of course, we can provide all city services. That's the area that you see that is in green. The area in blue is growth tier 2, and that is basically saying we can provide city services, water and sewer services, as well as other services in the near term, within the next, say 5 years or so or less. And then growth tier 3 requires significant city investment to serve. Megasite is a very good example. It was a significant investment, but again, it's got a significant return associated with it.
Mike, this is Sue. If I can just jump in. Oh,
Absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Go
He
ahead.
read my map. Okay, I love when engineers quote the comp plan, of course, but actually the next slide is exactly what I was going to jump into. And if I could just take the helm for this one slide.
Yes.
So especially since we've gotten a little bit of press or sort of press from communities in the north that we have somehow extended growth tier 3 through the comprehensive plan. That is not the case. Growth tier 3, the northern boundary, if you go back one, Mike, to show the growth tiers again. So growth tier 3, that boundary has been there since the original water and sewer service agreement that we had, that the municipalities had with the county. They have been our growth tier maps since 2003. We have not extended beyond them. They mirror that boundary are the boundaries of our annexation agreements. So there is a misnomer being spread that we are like heading towards Summerfield or heading towards Oak Ridge. These maps have been around for literally decades, and we are honoring those annexation boundaries. So these policies support each other, as Mike said. So, and he was doing a really good job on explaining the comp plan. So I'll shut up now and go back to the other one.
No, that's quite all right. So as Sue said, ultimately what we have to recognize, and of course, and respect with regard to our policy, is just like Sue said, the annexation boundary influence, which has, of course, has a significant ultimate impact as far as where we can extend water and sewer service. Now, the only caveat I would add to that is interlocal agreements. Now, of course, we have interlocal agreements on water, which is a great example, whether it's Burlington or whether it's with Reedsville to the north or Winston-Salem to the west, and even High Point. We have it with High Point. And we have an interlocal agreement, of course, with Jamestown. So, but Sue's absolutely right. These confines, as far as the annexation boundaries, need to be taken into consideration as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit about capacity allocation. So, as I mentioned, water and sewer is a finite resource. It's a limited resource. So it's imperative on us, of course, as a department, and with the city manager's office, to have us look at what is the best way for us to utilize our existing capacity, yet at the same time position ourselves so we can be successful decades down the road. And so we have, I mentioned in a previous work session, I believe it was last year, we've completed a capacity study about 2 years ago. And we identified things that and I'll talk about them in just a minute here, things we can do to continue to position ourselves well. So guess what? We can attract additional economic development, or we can be positioned for additional infill or support residential growth. And what I want to show in this slide is the ones that are the teal blue are firm capacity allocations that we have basically cooked into our recipe, to use that analogy. I'm going to start from the left to the right. So airport growth, we know, boom, very important for us. And we have reserve capacity to be able to support that. The great news about boom is that we've got water infrastructure and sewer infrastructure right next to where boom is going to be located. So of course, the question when we talk to Kevin and Alex and them at the airport is okay, where else do you want to grow? And we're having those conversations with them. So we can be right there ready to support them as they look at it, continue to expand the airport area. Infill is very critical. I've heard from many council members, and absolutely, we want to always make sure we reserve a capacity to address infill. Whether it's getting those legacy properties that are still on well or septic tank, or looking at additional, when we do redevelopment and what have you, being able to meet the capacity needs of our city as it grows and redevelop. And then looking to the east, Reedy Fork is another very good one where we've had some recent economic development announcements, whether it's Camp Burton with the Army Reserve, and we've got others that are in the Reedy Fork Business Park. So we've had some very good news, but again, making sure we've got the water and sewer capacity, which is being constructed and near complete up there. Eastern area. It's very interesting when I was preparing for this, looking back in history, I'm very thankful that council took on that task when we dissolved the city-county agreement, and we had that reserve of dollars. A significant amount of those dollars went to develop our water and sewer infrastructure in the east, over $40 million. And the wonderful thing is now that infrastructure is in place, so we can support projects along McConnell Road or Publix and all of those along US 70 corridor. So that's the great thing about investing back then when we dissolved the agreement back in 2011, 2012, that investment is paying off now. And I would, argue that it's paying off in a very good way for the city. And then, of course, you see to the lower right, mega site, that 1.5 million gallon per day commitment that we are building right now to go ahead and support the mega site in Toyota. And then the last one you see up there to the north it's a potential allocation. But when we talk about, we talk about annexation boundaries, but there are still areas where, if council so desires, where we could potentially look at, in north of the lakes, we potentially reserve some capacity if that's the desire of council as the governing body that leads and directs where water and sewer goes. If that's where they'd like to go, then we will make capacity available to go ahead and do that. And I mention all of that from the standpoint to bring it to the next slide. So it's important for me, again, all these growth considerations is again to circle back around and to mention it is finite. The resources that we have. We need to make sure that our growth is efficient and structured and strategic. And that when we do that, of course, we can support affordable rates for all of our customers. And it's great to report again as part of the the budget that we're going to present, but we're still the second lowest rates in North Carolina, of large utilities, which is great news for our ratepayers. PTRWA, when we look at water, I mentioned we are setting ourselves up for decades to make sure we're in a good position. PTRWA is a great example, a great investment that the city has a 53% ownership stake in. And if you look at it right now, looking at our demand, average daily demand, about 33 million gallons per day, and looking at the previous slide that I put up here, these capacity allocations, we have about 7 million gallons per day of excess capacity without pulling the trigger on PTRWA. But the good news is that if we need to, and when we need to pull the trigger, we will be ready. And I just want to give council a quick note. Right now, it is in our CIP for an expansion of PTRWA. They're giving us about 7 million gallons per day. The plant is rated for 14 right now. The next expansion would take it for about 10 million gallons per day more, 10 to 12. And we have the opportunity to be able to grab upwards of a 50% of that. So 50% of 10 to 12, you can see it's about 5 or 6 million gallons per day more capacity we'll be able to pull out of PTRWA. But of course, there's costs associated with it. So we have to balance that, of course, with our CIP and our rates. So position well with water. Wastewater, we are positioned fairly well. I wouldn't say we're positioned as well as water, but fairly well. You all know we completed our over $100 million expansion at the TZ Osborne wastewater treatment plant. So now we have full 56 million gallons per day capacity from the plant. And again, very similar to water, you can see it's about the same number. We have about 33 million gallons per day as far as the average daily flow in 2021. And it fluctuates, it fluctuates, of course, as far as weather, so significant weather events, of course, can increase that because of inflow and infiltration. But there's other factors too, of course, as we grow, that will rise as well. But the thing I want to point out is that while we're positioned fairly well on the wastewater side, what I would like us to consider is strategic partnerships to help meet long-term growth demand. PTRWA is a great example on the water side. Having that thought process as far as having a strategic partnership on the wastewater side, I think it would benefit us very well for decades and decades going forward. So some of the things that, that I'm working, of course, with city manager's office and staff, we're looking at what could that potentially look like. And so that's the thing for me, it's a lot of my focus, as well as balancing the other priorities to make sure that we're well positioned to meet the demands placed on our system. All right, I want to close here because on these kind of 3 points and then open it up, of course, for questions and discussion. So policy, looking at our current policy, supporting and influencing infill and fringe and external growth that benefits the city. That's part of the discussion around our current policy. I just mentioned regionalization potential through strategic partnerships. I think of our interconnects, and those go back, of course, when we had the droughts, about what's 2009, 2010 area. But those interconnects, those strategic partnerships with our neighbors have served us extremely well. And I think there's a lot of value if we look at it from that mindset on the wastewater side. And then the last thing is I value and appreciate any guidance from council as we look at potentially reshaping the policy to meet ultimately our needs. And I'm going to stop sharing there and stop sharing my screen so we can jump into discussion.
Hey, Mike, if you could turn your camera on. So I thought this was an important discussion for us to have for council to understand where our growth tiers are and how much capacity that we have. Because I know that all of us will be approached. I know that I've been approached for housing developments beyond where we are currently considering. I think it's important that we remember that along with these big announcements, there's usually a 5-to-1 multiplier, that there will be supply chain that's going to come down 421. I think we need people to understand where we're going to run water and sewer and what those limitations might be, what they should be beyond our current tier system. I know that we've already been approached by people looking at large housing developments out by the mega site. And I think we need to have that discussion up front to let people know whether or not we would extend water and sewer. And so that's really what jump-started this conversation a couple of weeks ago, because as Mike pointed out a number of times, we have to make sure that we protect our capacity and that we have enough capacity for us to grow within our borders and extending beyond, but to do it very intentionally. So if we were, I think it's important that right now we stick with the policy that we have, or if we're going to change it, that we should have a good rationale for changing it. And then that would just let our community know where they can expect infrastructure to be, how far away from the city.
So Mayor, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So I know our policy currently talks about annexation and water sewer for economic development purposes, but how defined is that term? Because to some, as I was talking to some yesterday, economic development, of course, they want to say housing, obviously.
And we need housing, so we
need
recognize
housing.
that.
So right, so but is adding commercial to it gonna be the caveat that makes it economic development? Down here at the league, I'm at Wilmington, and had a couple conversations yesterday. Of course, obviously one with the town of Sedalia, who saying, yeah, we're gonna have commercial and all that. So they're talking economic development. Some others are talking economic development. So I'm just kind of wondering how broad this term is that could be used for justifying running water sewer.
So,
or
one thing, Sharon, that I think we have to keep in the back of our minds is that there was a policy that if you incorporate to get away from the city, so that, there would be no possibility of an annexation, then, the policy was that we wouldn't run water and sewer there. If you incorporated to get away, we won't get property tax, that, that we would not consider running water and sewer.
So the question to me, when I said that, because I've said, is that, well, what if we become unincorporated? And,
Well, I mean, if somebody wants to unincorporate themselves, that's a different discussion. But right now, our policy has been that if you incorporated so that the city couldn't annex you and get property tax and do other things, that, we wouldn't be the utility provider.
Madam Mayor, I understood during the discussion on water that there are some ways to do that through economic development, limited housing. And if I understood that correctly, that's what I heard. I thought that is possible.
Well, I mean, anything's possible. We can always change our policy, but, do we want to extend water and sewer to places who have incorporated to get away from us?
Well, it
And I
depends
think
on
that
what
if-
the economic development would be to me. If it's going to benefit Greensboro, I might consider it.
Sue, did you want to add something?
Yes, ma'am. Just wanted to remind council from the work session, and I showed
Did you put your
places
camera
where.
on?
Oh, well, okay. It's not a pretty picture, but we'll go there. Okay. Whoops. Come back. I don't know what's. Okay, one more time. Start video. Take your finger off. There we go.
Okay.
Okay. So I wanted to remind council from the work session, and I did a presentation about where our growth trends were and where we were getting pressures. And one of the things I pointed out were the number of housing requests we were getting that were well outside of tier 3, because tier 3, the tiers are not just about water and sewer, they're about all city services.
Yes.
The second biggest issue is the provision of public safety. When we have told people that we cannot provide fire service and nor can the county, they kind of looked at us like, so what? And I'm not exaggerating, but there's that issue that comes into play. The second piece, though, economic development in the policy that was adopted in 2012 does have a very specific definition of what economic development is. It can be a mixed use project if no more than 25% of the project is residential. So there is a provision, and those may be the things that you would like us to take a look at. But the intent and what the policy has done through the careful stewardship of the council as we've moved forward in the last 10 years, as we've grown where we can reasonably provide services. Now we're growing a whole lot faster, as I told you a month ago, than we ever imagined. So we're jumping, and so we're falling behind in things like investing in fire department, build new fire stations and things. So that's what I want to just kind of add to the layer. It gets very tempting to just talk about the water or just talk about the sewer, but these things interrelate with each other. And I have to give Mike a huge compliment because we work in lockstep with each other to try and make sure we're providing the most accurate information we can and look at the analysis together. But water, sewer, other city services, connecting them, trying not to encourage sprawl, which was also behind the 2012 policy, because we had been spreading water and sewer hither and yon, and without the road network and other service network, that became a problem. So all these things come together, and I'll get off my soapbox if there's any questions.
You bring up a good point, because one of the incorporated towns to the north of us calls themselves a limited service a limited service provider, and we don't have that luxury. I mean, we are a full service provider, and you really highlighted the public safety and of course, field ops. All of these things are very important that we can serve them. That's not even getting into parks and libraries and things like that. It's just the basic services.
Yeah, well,
I'm sorry, Mrs. Hoffman, then Mrs. Dr. Wells.
Yeah, the question for Mike. Mike, obviously, we're in a better position from a water point of view. So how do we improve the sewer position over the next 5 to 10 years?
That's it.
Does Rockingham County provide some option for us?
No, I don't think Rockingham County does. What we were looking at, of course, and I don't want to go into a lot of details, but I just want to say that if we look at our adjacent counties, in relation, of course, to where we've got our economic development, large economic development projects, I think there is a potential there. We've started some initial conversations. So okay. I just prefer not to go into a lot of detail, if that's okay.
Fine, I understand.
Dr. Wells?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The thing that I think that we have to consider is whether we can provide those other services. I was out at Reedy Fork over the weekend, and that's what they're complaining. They still don't have a library. They don't have the city services. It takes too long for the police to get to them. And then I have the other end in McLeansville. So the people that we annex, we need to make sure that we're able to provide the other services that go along with it, so that we don't get bashed for just because they can get the water and sewer. And I think the importance of having a council is that whether it's an extension for economic development, we have to examine the situation, and the council should make responsible decisions about whether it's something that we should pursue or not. So I just think we need to consider more than one thing.
Yeah, I would like to see staff come back with an update to our policy so that we can have a current policy. If you would look at the old one and see how it could be updated and get it on an agenda for us so people know what to expect.
So Mayor, you're asking them to come back with a policy, which is, I guess they're gonna look at the whole area. I saw Mike had highlighted some things and had some things in red only within that boundary of that area. Perhaps you were asking them to look at, or just.
I would like to see a comprehensive.
Yeah, I'd like to see. And would we not by incorporated areas at some? I think we've got incorporated areas on every side. I think.
Yeah, well, incorporated areas is kind of just a whole nother topic. Then we have that red sewer boundary that's been our boundary for a long time. How are we going to service those areas? Would we go beyond that? I think it's just important that we have something that people can look at that's been updated, that with all the growth that we're going to have, especially growth to the east. This is a great problem for us to have because we've been talking about growing to the east for a long time. Now you actually see that growth happening. People want us to go further east, where do you stop?
Right. Well, and that's great. I'd love to hear, but I want to make sure we are talking to staff, that the other staff and the other services like Goldie was talking about, because in talking to field ops, I mean, every time we annex, they need another truck and 2.5 people. And that's something we have to consider. And if we go too far out, we need 2 trucks and 5 or 6 people. So it's a budget impact to the budget, even though it sometimes says no impact, but it certainly is an impact. So water and sewer actually does cost us in many ways. And I think those conversations ought to be, and talking to those individuals who have those services should work together on that policy, because it ought to be something we ought to provide. I have people on Mount Hope Church Road complaining they don't have libraries and parks and police and things like that too. So it is a comprehensive issue that we ought to be focused on. So, but I also know people want water and sewer, and we got the best water and sewer.
Yeah, so that's why we need to have a policy. And something that we can say has been updated. So if we can get that and bring it back to another work session, and we can take a swipe at it then.
Absolutely. There are certainly some things, I think, of acreage fees that are no longer applicable. That needs to be revised in the policy. So absolutely, Mayor and Council Member, there's just, several things that we can address. I will work very closely with planning, and planning, of course, will pull in the other departments that provide services to the city. And absolutely, we can pull together some tracked changes. So that way a council can take a look at what's existing and what we're proposing.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Tammy?
Mike, as you're looking at that and what's proposed, I think we also need to look at the potential, as our area grows, what potential expense and down the road looks like for the Jordan Lake One Water requirements, or not requirements, but participation, and how that's going to get impacted as well, so that we can look at, financing that long term and where that comes from, because that's going to enter into the equation too as we grow that area east and southeast.
That's a very good point. Absolutely. We need to take that into consideration. And the good news, as far as the Jordan Lake One Water Initiative, we do have some, I'll call it a straw man or some framework, as you know. So absolutely, we can take that into consideration.
Thank you.
Mary Kay?
I had one. I'm sorry, Mary Kay.
How about Mary Kay, then Sharon?
Okay.
No, I'm good. I was listening. My question got asked. Thank you.
Okay. Sharon?
No, Mike, I was just going to ask you, did you get any ARP money for water sewer? ARPA money?
No,
Okay.
we didn't.
I was just wondering, because I was in a seminar this morning with DEQ, and he was talking about that. So there's some options if you've got some money to use some of that in some of the underserved areas and communities. So, but they only talked about 4.5 million. So they didn't really get a whole lot, but I was just wondering if you got any.
No, we could certainly use it. When I look at the cost to the mega site, then water and sewer.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Mike, I appreciate it. Just so council knows, on Tuesday, I'm going to recommend that we appoint David Parish to the Water Authority to replace Frankie Jones. So I hope that'll meet with council approval. He was very excited to continue his service to the city. So we've got two more items. Can we do the LGC one?
Madam Mayor, I'm going to have to leave you because I have to get sworn in.
Okay. Well, you got to do that. Represent us.
Yeah, I agree. So if I tip off, that's why.
Okay.
Yes, we'll do the fund balance, Mayor. Thank you.
You want to do the fund balance first?
Yes, Marlene.
Yeah, the LGC. Yes.
Great. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of City Council. Marlene Druga. I'm going to share my screen. Great. Here we go. So we're continuing to work on our fund balance improvement plan. And we took the feedback from the last work session and incorporated into a draft response that Larry circulated yesterday for your review. And the goal is to try to raise our fund balance from the 22% that we reported in fiscal 21 to the required minimum threshold of 25% for the LGC. So we need to respond to them by March 9th or by May 8th, excuse me. And so we were proposing to bring this to Tuesday's meeting, the May 3rd meeting, for your review and approval. So some of the key components, we're proposing to adopt the new 25% goal and monitor the progress, and then also have a prioritization guide for any mid-year appropriations that what we heard last time, it was going to be used primarily for an emergency fund or emergency savings for unforeseen matters, unforeseen events, and also for any immediate public health or safety measures. And then secondly, as economic development initiatives and property purchases. And a note on the latter two, as each of our areas in the city grows economically and the surrounding areas and becomes more robust, it automatically translates to a natural fund balance growth in the form of sales tax and property tax revenues too. So basically naturally growing. And then also we're proposing to maintain the supermajority for the vote on using fund balance, the 7 of the 9. And then if we use fund balance, we're proposing to talk about the impact and also discuss a plan for replacement. And then finally, consider a specific commitment in the fiscal 22-23 budget of at least 20 or 0.25 or a quarter of a cent of the property tax or more, or an equivalent amount of other means to commit toward a fund balance improvement. And one of the items that we mentioned in the memo yesterday was, as we were talking originally about our capital needs and also our debt plans and debt service needs, we had originally projected about a 1.5 cent increase in the property tax just for the debt service part. And so as we've gotten updated and improved estimates from Guilford County on the revaluation, that 1.5 cents, because of more growth anticipated, it's actually turned into 1.25, so actually dropped about a quarter of a cent. So if we kept the 1.5 cent allocation for debt service, 1.25 could go for the actual principal and interest payments, and then the other 0.25 could go toward a fund balance improvement, just as another option. So that's the end of the slides. About 900,000 would be a quarter of a cent. And at the lower amount that we would commit, it would take us longer to achieve our goal. So at about a quarter of a cent, it would take us about 10 years if all estimates were still in place. So those are our slides. If we had any more direction or more feedback, so that we can propose something that you would consider on Tuesday.
Nancy, I'd love to get your input, what your thoughts are, especially since you're working with the LGC. And my understanding is that you would still be able to vote on this because that is an extension of the government function.
Yes,
Is that correct, Chuck?
Yeah, Guilford County, there was a bond issue for Guilford County a couple of months ago, and I did not have to recuse myself for that. So I don't think that will be required. You know, I said when we were originally talking about this, I would like to see us do this on a faster scale than 10 years, but that's obviously something for us to discuss. The other thing that I talked with Marlene about probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, one of the other things that will be looked at and pointed out when our bond package goes to the LGC for a review is our unfunded liabilities. This is something that the treasurer, Mr. Falwell, takes a very careful look at. And I don't know whether we've ever really looked at or talked about our unfunded liabilities. But Marlene, do you want to comment on what those are at all? I mean, to the extent that, that's going to be part of the consideration, and he's going to look at me and have some comment regarding them. So I don't know what that will be, but I'd like for us to at least know what that number and what that looks like for us in the future.
So the primary unfunded liabilities would be 3 things. It would be our pension plan, which is the local government as part of the state employee or state local unit plan. Then also our retiree benefits, which go to age 65 for the city's current retirees. And then also there's a mandated law enforcement special separation allowance, which is another form of a pension plan, a defined benefit pension plan. So the actuaries help us determine what those future costs would be. So we figure it as employees are working. And then we would say, okay, as the employee works, this would be an estimated amount that we would need to be paying toward their pension and their retiree health benefits and such. And so on the, so the city's number, they're large, but they're not nearly as large as some of the other units. And I think on the retiree side for the health benefits, it's because we stop them at age 65. But right now that benefit is around $158 million. And we have about 34 million of it sitting in a trust invested for the future benefits. So roughly net about $125 million just for the retiree health. The regular city pension plan, it's about 87 million. And then also the law enforcement special separation, it's about 35 million. We have about 8 million sitting in a trust for those benefits. So you're not required to actually fund these liabilities, but the fact that we are funding and advanced funding actually helps the matters, because then we can take the benefit of interest earnings on them. So each year there's an actuarially determined contribution. And on the pension side, we're contributing around 17 million for that. And then the other two, it's roughly 10 million combined. So the numbers are showing up, they're not at the fund level. So all that shows up at our fund level is just the contributions that we're making. It's considered a pay-go is how they refer to it, paying as the benefits are coming currently due. Did that answer?
Sure. No, that was great. I think it's just important for us to know. I mean, that's a liability out there in the future that we just always need to be aware of. The fact that we're contributing to it on a consistent basis, of course, is appropriate. But it's just another one of those things that the LGC will look at when they really parse out all of the evaluation of what we want to do in a couple of months.
So we do need to.
I would love to see us pay. I would like to see us do this on a shorter term than what we've been talking about.
Justin?
Yeah, I agree with Councilman Hoffman. I would like for us to see this done on a much shorter term. I mean, the requirement exists to really help ensure that cities, including Greensboro, when there is a financial crisis or the like, have the resources necessary to continue to operate and not have to cut back on essential services. And based on the presentation and information that we've received, we're the only major city in North Carolina to not meet that 25% recommendation or requirement, however you want to frame it, from the LGC. And so, my preference is that we actually close the gap now. We're uniquely positioned to do it now, make up the $9 million, and then build into our budget annually the items that consistently cause us to raid that fund balance or that emergency account. And then, as we discussed at the prior meeting, surprises will always pop up, but that's where it becomes a matter of discipline and actually budgeting and not touching the emergency account, because it's there for, in my view, unexpected, unforeseeable things that are truly emergencies, not things that you can plan and have a very good expectation that they're going to in fact happen. Even the recommendation to dedicate a percentage off of the taxes, if the policy still allows us to raise that amount, it's really a continuation of what we've been doing. And so I think, given the LGC's recommendations given how we compare so unfavorably to other cities, including cities that have double the amount in their fund balance as a percentage of their operating budgets. That's definitely what I think that we should do.
Mrs. Hightower?
So, kind of want to speak to Justin's point. I'm sorry if I'm sitting in a weird place. I look kind of weird here. But if we're on this plan that we've made to get to the 25%, where are we with what is the rush? So if we're on this plan that we talked about, LGC wanted a plan, we're reflecting a plan that we're going to get there by the time necessary to meet the plan, then why do we need to turn around and just, well, let's just do it, put all this money there now, and then consider the things that we would maybe spend it on if we had it. Because what concerns me is if you do that, then it may be something you decide, well, we'll put it off because we don't want to disturb the fund balance being where it's at. And we can, right now, maybe not a good time to do that. And I think we've been neglected on so many services that we have not done adequately. And I had an interesting conversation last night with the commissioner from Zebulon who says, yeah, they got 50% in their fund balance, but they don't have any services. They've neglected so many services at the city. So while they held on all that money, to me, that's not being fiscally, responsible. If you're holding it, but you're not doing what you need to be doing at the same time. And unless we're just not on the right track to get there, or we're going to get there longer than it should, I just think we ought to go with the plan that's proposed to get there. That's kind of how I see it. So.
And to explain or address the point you raised to me, Councilman Hightower, the plan is essentially to allow us to do what we have done in the past. That is, raid the emergency account when we deem appropriate. And so, it says dedicate a percentage of the tax, but it also still allows us to rate it, for example, for foreseeable non-emergency related expenses. And so it's presented as a plan, but it doesn't really change fundamentally the issue, which is our rating the emergency account for things that are not, in fact, emergencies. And I agree with you that if it became a matter of us cutting essential services versus us building up our fund balance to match our peers or meet the LGC's requirements, that would be a really tough choice. But we can close the gap without cutting back on any services. And what I think, at least in my mind, what's a very serious concern is when you do have an unexpected financial disaster, are you as a city forced to be in a position where you're having to cut back on essential services like some cities had to do during the Great Recession and lay off sanitation workers and delay the schedule for picking up trash and things like that? And so, your points are well made, but that's my response to address them. Thank you.
Tammy?
I kind of see this not as an either or, but an and. I could see us putting a big chunk of funds in at this time from the ARP funds, and maybe looking at a 3-year window for the remainder or something of that nature, which gives us some flexibility in funding key projects through the ARP funds that we may not have otherwise, and gets us a long way towards our goal, but still allows us a little bit of flexibility where we don't find that we're a year from now or 2 years from now wanting to rob the savings account, so to speak, or borrow from the savings account. I agree, 10 years is a long time to go. But if we did 2/3 of it from the ARP money, perhaps, and work the other into our budget, I think that kind of gives us the best of both worlds.
And I think it's also our being honest with the citizens in terms of, what the cost of running the city of Greensboro really is. And living in a city with a very high quality life and with services and assets. So for a long time, I mean, we just kind of borrowed from the fund balance to balance the budget a little bit every year. Instead of sometimes just doing the thing that's really hard. And that's saying, these are important services and these are important assets for the city and making the case for that. So, I really feel, pretty strongly that we need to attack this sooner rather than later. And sometimes just do the hard thing.
Mayor, if I can I jump in for just one quick second? I apologize.
Yes.
Just to add one other aspect to this, we are under a 60-day response timeline, which complicates the process. So that timeline ends on May the 8th. So your last official meeting before that deadline will be May 3rd.
Yeah.
If council is prepared to adopt this as its minimum program, and it sounds like comments are either this is good or it needs to be stronger. No one seems to be saying this is too strong. I think we can take this to the LGC as our first cut, as our absolute minimum, and council can continue to amend it, make it stronger as part of your conversation during the budget process. But we really do need council to adopt some type of response to the LGC on May the 3rd.
I'm okay with responding.
Tammy, then Justin.
I was also going to say, and this wasn't in response to Larry's comment, though, Larry, I would like to force us to be a little bit more aggressive in our response, just to kind of push us along. But I was also going to say, anything we can do to look at minimizing tax implications from the bonds, I think will also be helpful. And by going ahead and biting the bullet and funding much as we can now, I think helps the picture when we look at what's the impact of the bond when we're setting tax rates. That was the only other comment.
Thank you. Justin?
Consistent with Councilman Thurm's remarks, I'm certainly supportive of closing it out and meeting the 25% now, or even 2/3. But with the 2/3, I think it's essential that we not give ourselves latitude to raid the account for non-emergencies. To me, that's the key. The proposal as it exists right now, again, in my view, largely allows what has gotten us in this situation, which is not a good one. And so now I would certainly support us tackling 2/3 of it now, and then, the remaining 1/3 over a period of several years, but with the requirement that we're not raiding the account, bringing it back down for non-emergency expenses. And so if there's, I know we're at a work session, but I'm happy to make that a motion or whatever direction staff needs, if that's the will of the majority.
So I have a question.
Sure.
Oh, I'm raise my hand. So where are you proposing this money come from? Because Tammy's talking, somebody's talking about ARP money.
Well, Justin brought up ARP at the last time we discussed this.
So, I mean, you want to take ARP money to add to the fund balance. So then that takes away the opportunity to use ARP in its flexibility for other items. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
So, because the way,
that's why I didn't want to take the whole amount. I wanted to leave some of it.
Yeah. So,
but 2/3 of what? Because, we've had 2/3.
So it would be roughly $6 million, right, Larry? 2/3? Yeah, so $6 million. I think the 10-year payback is is way too long. I could see doing a hybrid approach like Tammy mentioned. I think we could go up from 1/4 to 1/2 cent and pay it back twice as quickly. You know,
And so
I
we're
would
gonna
not
have to raise taxes, Mayor, to pay this back?
Well, we got to pay it some way, Sharon. I mean, it's going to either come out as a budgeted item or come out of the ARP. There are no other options, but we can, you know, we can combine the two also.
Because we may be looking at raising taxes if the bond passes, the 135 passes. So then we're talking about that in addition to this. And, you know, you just sat in a meeting with me on Monday where you heard concerns about the tax rate in light of the high property appraisals that just went up.
Right.
So I think we ought to be really considerate of that. In this regard, maybe not 10 years, you know, maybe 5, but I'm a little concerned that if we do that, raise the rate to do this, to fund it this way, we stand to maybe lose on another end.
Mary Kay, then Justin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Knowing the urgency and that Tuesday would be our last meeting before the deadline, I would prefer to go with Larry's and staff's recommendation on this, because also within it, it says, you know, there could be other revenues come in that could offset this. And knowing that this is the minimum, and I understand everybody wants to get it paid off earlier, we can discuss all that later, correct, Larry? I mean, we can revise, we can tweak, we can do all of those things, but knowing that this is a good first, I would like to say draft, but something needs to be submitted. I would really prefer to go ahead and go with this, and then we can discuss later if we need to change, if we're going to use the ARPA funds, whatever we're going to use. So, and I do kind of agree with Sharon, we need to be careful about talk about raising taxes, because, you know, people still are kind of in a crunch, and they just really are concerned about, you know, are we going to be the council to raise taxes? So just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Is that me next, Madam Mayor?
Well, it was Justin, but you haven't spoken yet on this. Justin, would you mind if he went and then you? Hugh, go ahead.
I'll be very brief. I was going to say exactly what Mary Kay said, to go with what we have with Larry. We have a short time window, but then also I am concerned about ARP funding. It's you know, in the first pass of it, we saw a lot of the organizations that we funded in the past. And I think I said at the time, I'll say it again, that there are a lot of organizations out there, a lot of startups, a lot of newer organizations that were not in the mix, who need to be in the mix. And whether it's, you know, 1 million or 2 million or 6 million, wherever it is, that's a lot of opportunity for growth, for small business development. And we just need to be very careful about the utilization of ARP funds at the expense of the most vulnerable, but still eligible applicants. Thank you.
Thank you. Justin?
And for me, I think it's important to give city staff direction so that they can act and execute on a plan that's consistent with the will of the majority of the council. And certainly there are easier decisions that the council would make. But for me, again, I think it's important that we actually give staff the direction. And this goes to kind of the foundation of the city. You know, the emergency account is there and designed to make sure that the city can always deliver on essential city services, even when there are unforeseen disasters. And so I certainly, you know, think there are other programmatic good things that it would be great if the city expanded services and did additional things. But foundationally, I think we need to make sure, instead of prioritization, that the emergency account meets 25%, which again, still would have us below our other peer major cities in North Carolina. I think with ARP, obviously, well over even $9 million to close this gap, there's still a lot of money to then expand city services, provide other support to outside organizations and the like. But I view those things, even though they're very good and very worthy, as being secondary to making sure that the city at all times, even after all of us have ended our time of public service, continue to deliver and make sure trash gets collected, there's clean drinking water, and if there's an unexpected financial crisis like in 2007, city employees are not having to be laid off or furloughed or the like. And so that's kind of the basis for my decision.
Yeah, Mayor, I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is a weak response from us to the LGC's area of concern with the city of Greensboro. And I would just like to see us have a stronger response.
I said, I'm comfortable going to a half a penny if we want to put some lump sum in, but I don't want to do 9 million. I mean, I would not do the whole transfer out of ARP. If we want to find a ratio that everybody could live with, I don't know if other people on council want to do the full 9 out of ARP.
To be clear, I'm fine with not doing all of it at once, but I think the essential part, in addition to that, if you're not going to do all of it at once, is we don't raid that fund for things that are foreseeable. It's only for unexpected emergencies or expenses.
If council wishes to go to a half cent on the resolution, I think the LGC would see that as a specific and meaningful first step. And again, you can continue to consider the use of ARP funds or other funds to further close the gap in future conversations.
What would that do for the timing? What would that do for the timing? If it went to a half cent, what would that mean in terms of how long it would take for us to get to the 25%? Assuming that there was also the requirement, which would be communicated to the LGC, that we're not going to rate it for non-emergencies.
Marlene, I'll ask you to speak to that.
When I computed it last, we had about 1.5 cents, was about 5.5 million, took us about 5 years at 1.5 cents. 5 years, roughly 5 years, if our expense assumptions stayed around the same.
Did I misunderstand? I thought you said a 1/4 cent would get us where we need to be in 10 years.
At about a 10-year point, but if we increased it to about 1.5 cents now, we could get there in half the time, around 5 years.
What about 1/2 cent, Marlene?
Yeah, that's what, yeah.
One half cent,
Yes.
0.5.
Yeah.
I think it was around between 5 and 10, so around 7 years or so. So it wasn't, as quick. So between 5 and 10. The reason why it's so hard to achieve this is that our expenditures are growing this year. So that's the challenge. And so we have to just make up, additional amounts. It just doesn't stay flat.
Yeah, it is a moving goalpost. It's going to get bigger every year. Yeah.
Right.
Sharon?
Well, I was going to say from the last work session, I thought we had kind of come up with the 1/2 cent being what maybe if we have to would be the lowest we could, if we have to raise that, it was the 1/2 cent. The 1.5 I'm not in support of. I think staff came up with a good plan, but if we have to modify it some, and I'm still not there with taking money from the ARP. It just has too much flexibility in what it was designed to come down for, the way it was written and the way it was designed. I think we will miss a lot of opportunity with ARP funding if we just put it somewhere in a savings and just to satisfy LGC. It's not like the LGC saying, put this money in tomorrow. If you don't do it, there's an issue, there's a penalty. They're not saying that. And they ask for a plan. And I think if we give them a plan, I disagree with it being weak. I think it's trying to be very intentional to make sure we do it the most prudent way. So I can live with the 1/2 cent as well as maybe 6, 7 years, but definitely not taken from ARP.
And if the LGC had required it, they would have said it in no uncertain terms.
Absolutely.
Goldie? You're muted, Goldie.
What does the R, what do those initials stand for?
American Rescue Plan.
Rescue. American Rescue Plan. I don't think it's for us to put in our, to try to make up for something we haven't done. I just don't agree with it. I think that the money should be used to help people to rescue if they need some help. Small businesses and those people who've had some things that they couldn't do and the pandemic threw them behind. I just don't think it's the best thing for us to do now. You all may think so, but I don't. I just don't think those funds are supposed to be used for that.
Then let's bite the bullet. I think our plan needs to be 5 years, not 10 years.
Yeah, I would agree. It needs to be 5 years.
Let's do it from a tax point of view and decide how we feel it's best to spend ARP funds. We've got some time left there.
Tammy?
Trying to understand, and Councilwoman Hightower, maybe you can help me understand what you're trying to say, is because I've heard you say that we don't want to raise taxes to do this, and we don't want to use ARP funds to do this. So is your recommendation to cut from our operating budget over the next 5 years to do this, or what is your recommendation? I'm trying to understand, and you're muted. Sharon, you're muted.
Want to raise taxes at all, but if we have to, the last discussion we had at work session was 0.5 cent. That was the last discussion, not 1.5 cents as they came up with, or even 1
I
cent.
think
we talked about that.
Sharon, I don't think anybody said 1.5. It was 0.5 cent. I think it was misheard.
Okay, well, maybe it was misheard because I'm, 1.5 cent I'm concerned about, because when you talk about, I really don't want to raise taxes at all. But if raising it just, I'm really on the fence, but I don't want us to use ARP money. And why are you so adamant that we have to cut operating expense to get here?
I'm not. I was just asking you what you were proposing. I wasn't.
Because I think the plan is going forth now. Yeah, I don't like 10 years. So you want to put more money in quicker. Okay. Well, the 0.5 cent gives us what Marlene had told me the last time I asked her, and it got us to where we got to. I'm not sure how we got off track today, beyond moving it, beyond just saying we're sending a weak plan to LGC.
Well, because today it was 1/4 cent.
Well,
yeah, so we don't want to do 1/4 cent.
Quarter.
Whose hand did I see up? I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. So maybe it's 1/4 cent, but if we,
well, yeah, in the paperwork today, it said 1/4 cent.
Okay.
So we're talking about 0.5 cent. Justin?
Yeah, to Councilwoman Thurm's point, I mean, there are 3 ways in which we can close the gap, or combination of the 3. It's through the operating budget as it exists now. It's through ARP, or directly or indirectly, or it's through increases in revenues to the city, which could be through increased taxes, or could be through other ways in which revenues have increased to the city. But to me, the most important thing is, again, this is the foundation, and that we close that gap in a way that it's much shorter than 7 years. I think 5 years is reasonable. And we don't allow the practice of continuing to raid that, so we're in the very same position in year 6, year 7, and so on. And so if there's a majority of the council that agrees on that, I think that we could direct staff to present various different options, and hopefully we can come to a consensus on that, recognizing that the key is we're not going to raid the emergency account, and we're going to get the emergency account to be at least in the same stratosphere as our peers.
Yeah.
Let me just
Before,
comment too.
Marlene, before Tuesday, could you count, can you calculate whether a half a cent would get us there in 5 years, or would it be 7, or, best guess, whatever?
So it's.
Let me just note, I'm sorry, Marlon, go ahead.
It's between 5 and 10 years, a half cent. And that's, in order to get us at 5 years, it would be 1.5 cents.
I know I heard 1.5 somewhere. Okay.
Yeah.
So on Marlene's behalf, let me say, I asked her to walk a very fine line to come up with something that we felt like would meet LGC requirements for the 60-day deadline, but at the same time, did not tie the hands of council before you've even had a chance to see the manager's recommended budget. Because you're essentially being asked to consider a tax rate implication out of context, which is an unfair position to put the elected body in. So when Marlene brought to me the improved numbers from the county, and we realized that the 1.5 cent that we've been talking about for a couple of years, and that may be the 1.5 that keeps integrating into this conversation, Councilmember Hightower, the 1.5 cents that we're going to need for debt service could actually be accommodated with 1.25 cents. That opened up the possibility that we could reallocate that 1/4 cent without actually having to ask for any higher taxes. That's how the 1/4 cent got to you yesterday, which is essentially that math. If we are prepared to go to make the program as strong as council wishes it, right now, to be blunt though, my higher priority is time rather than money, because we do have to submit something to the LGC by May the 8th.
So could we agree to retire this debt within 5 years and have Marlene come up with the letter that would get us there within 5 years?
But with 5 years, raise us taxes 1.5 cents.
Well,
I just want us to be careful with messaging. I think what we're using that could really be triggers for a lot of people. So we just really need to be very careful. I think that the most straightforward thing we want to do is to just say we're getting a letter to the LGC that says we're going to fulfill this obligation within this timeline, and make it as strong as possible, and we can start having the conversation. But I'm just worried that we're using words like raising taxes, we're paying a debt. Again, I do not want us to convey a sense that we're in a financially hard situation. No, we're not. We're physically healthy as a city. However, though, we want to make sure that we respect the requirements for meeting that fund balance obligation from year to year. So whether that's a 10-year thing that we propose and we end up doing it within 5 years, even after the letter has gone up to them, that's fine. But we're just giving ourselves enough time. So even if we say today we go with what staff has recommended, it doesn't stop you from still having a conversation to actually attack this sooner rather than later. So I just want to kind of put that out there. The letter we send is neither weak nor strong. It's a commitment that we have a plan in place and we're going to do this over this period of time with this amount of funds. But that does not stop you from making a different decision between now and that time period to go back again. I don't want you to hamstring yourself by having to say you want to do this now, when you really have a recommendation in front of you that gives you a lot of latitude down the line. I think what the LGC is looking for, in my experience with them, is a commitment to a plan. If we make a plan right now, we commit to it, and then we come back and we can also improve upon that plan. That to me is the main thing we should focus on.
Right. So the Mr. City Manager, what you're saying is that I'm sorry, is it me?
Yes.
Okay. Are you saying that we can say a 5-year plan, or we can say a 7 to 8 year plan, or we can say a 10-year plan, and then from there we can make it better? Yes. If that's the case, then I would rather go for the longer term and tighten it down the road versus the tighter term and then not have the room to move longer. That makes any sense.
Yeah.
Justin?
Yeah, so for me, there's the LGC, there's the letter, there's also like the substance, like what are we talking about at the substance, even divorced from if the LGC existed or not. I think it's important for the council to provide actual direction to staff and set priorities for staff. And I think that, there's certainly been time to do this, and having further time in additional months to come back and re-examine this doesn't make the decision any easier. If we tell staff to present to us a budget that makes sure that we're at 25% and stay at 25%, they will present a budget consistent with that, but we actually have to give them the direction and the prioritization for them to do so. Otherwise, we'll continue to have, what we've had in the past, which is not to say it's bad or good, but if we don't give them direction to do something differently, we haven't given them direction to do something different.
Well, yeah, and I think what I'm trying to do is give them direction, which is why I said, let's try to pay it off in 5 years. I do think that 10 years is too long, but I don't want us to get lost. We've got a AAA credit rating, and we have, and the budgeting is always recognized for doing a good job, and we always have great audits. We are in sound financial condition, and we have had issues. We had a tornado where we had to dip into it. So we know about rainy day funds. I mean, so, what I've said is, let's see if we can do this in 5 years. And that's what, I don't know if the rest of council agrees with that. We can always, in the end, make it tighter or put in ARP funds, but at least this gives us something to send to the LGC.
Yeah, agreed. So I think our financial condition is categorically good. It's our planning and discipline that's not good. It's the rating of the emergency account that's bringing it down below 25% and making us a negative outlier as compared to our peers. That's not good. And so, again, I'm certainly supportive, and hopefully there's a majority that says we'll do it within 5 years, and we will not raid this account or this fund for non-emergencies. But again, I think even if we were to say to do it for 5 years, but we allow ourselves to rate it for non-emergencies, that really isn't fundamentally changing the problem that's allowed us to be in this position where we are now.
Well, it wouldn't be paying it back in 5 years if we were taking money out.
No, you could pay it back in 5 years, and then the 6th year you rate it all down because you want to build, whatever.
But then you're not at
facility.
you're not at the percentage we need to be. We're not at 25%. So, I mean, I think we can go round and round on this.
I mean, if we could do this in 5 years, I mean, I would certainly be for
I can support 5 years.
All right.
Years.
Agreed.
All right.
So we will try to circulate some options for council prior to Tuesday night. And Mayor, I'll ask that we try to get some sense of which we think is the best option so that we can maximize the likelihood of council action Tuesday night.
Thank you.
Larry, is that going to include an option for 7 to 8 years as opposed to 5?
I think it'll be multiple options all geared towards a 5-year turnaround, which is what I think I'm hearing.
And Larry,
But you're still going to reflect the 10 years though, right? And that was going to be my question. Just because you put this plan into place doesn't pigeonhole you into the 10-year. You can always, if the revenues come in at a higher rate than we were expecting, move money over into that and maybe close the gap quicker than 10 years. But to me, I think you're gonna find yourself in a hard pressed situation if you just do 5 years and say do this, because inflation is rising. And sooner or later, we're gonna have to deal with inflation too. We need to be realistic about that and the way the cost is and all that.
Right.
So
I would tend to agree, and I'm just wondering if we go 5 years, what's the impact to ARP? And then going back to that conversation, are we robbing from people to pay Paul from ARP to the LGC? I'm not really excited about that.
What I proposed is that we do the 5 years out of the budget. I haven't said that we would take it out of our ARP. I mean, if we decide at the end of the ARP process that there's excess funding or that this is a better way to spend it, we can do that.
And Mr. Davis, I think kind of, at least my reading of those who were in support of doing it 5 years, you get to 5 years and you stay at the 25% by not allowing yourself to raid the fund, the fund again for non-emergencies. And so I think that it's important that be expressly stated, since that's clearly the intent of least those who spoke up in that connection.
Absolutely.
All right, so are we good on the 5-year option? Are there, I know Yvonne's not on the phone. I think Mrs. Hoffman was fine. I think Mr. Outling, Mrs. Boosterwaiter,
Yes.
Tammy,
Yes.
Sharon?
I just don't know. Are we
Okay.
just limited to 5 or are we?
We would,
Again,
that would be,
5 can be the goal. But I think the letter should just state what we have here. And then if 5 is the goal, we go for the goal. But if something happens and we don't, then where do we land?
I think it's a good start, and then it can be reworked or we can redo anything, but I think getting this letter in is the biggest urgency. And
yeah,
I personally don't.
That's what I agree. I agree that we need to get the letter in for 5
I may not
years.
agree with all of this,
Okay.
but I think we need to get the letter in.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with getting the letter in, absolutely.
And say
Hugh,
5 years,
you can-
but don't put a whole lot of.
all right, so the consensus is 5 years.
Thank you.
Larry, if you could get us, and then I hope the next item will be somewhat quick. I know we've talked about it a couple of times, and this is the employee bonuses. Mr. City Manager?
Well, actually, I was going to talk about the council priorities, but
Oh, okay.
yes.
City bonus, the bonuses are on the next agenda. Sorry.
Yes, but I know we only have like 3 minutes, so I will not.
Yeah.
But we did send out, I believe, that presentation to you. And frankly, I think if April could pull it up, I will only direct your attention to one slide there. What we really need from you is to be able to confirm for us, if I could use that word, what those priorities that we should be working on, frankly, in terms of the measures and the metrics that we're going to develop. You discussed different things at the retreat, but if you look at the next slide, definitely you're familiar with that. That's really what I meant when I came in. But if we quickly go to the last slide number 6, it puts side by side what was adopted in 2021 and what we heard during the retreat. Now, it's similar in many respects, but there were certain areas that were very specific, such as job opportunities, that's probably related to workforce. We heard a lot about trash removal and how that is important to you, and assisting, working with our partners to make sure that we assist with the homelessness issues. So today, this is not necessarily for us to discuss as to maybe add nods from you, whether what we had at the strategy session and how we've represented that here on that right-hand column, if that seems consistent with you. I know we talked about what you see in red, essentially are things that we may need to revisit. For example, we said 1,000 units by 2022. Do we need to revisit 2022 and make it 2023? Do we need to increase the number of units? Violent crime 20% by 2022. Here we are in the first quarter, at the end of the first quarter. We talked about the funds balance today, so we will review that. The public transportation, we have those numbers. So when you look at this, I just would like to know from you. I would like to come back to you with specific measures, but I want to be sure that what you see for the 2022 strategy session as compared with what was adopted in 2021, if those are accurate, reflections of your thoughts, and then we'll go back and define what those metrics should be and then bring that back to you. That's all I wanted to chat with you about. Thank you, Mia.
Okay, any comments?
Yeah, I think we can leave that particular slide on.
Okay.
So Tab, when did you send that out? Because I've not really, did you send that out recently, like this week?
I think was sent out today.
Oh, yeah, I haven't even had a chance to see it, so we need to look it over.
Yes,
first.
not a problem at all. If you look it over, what I'll do is I will be reaching out to you all And then if you have comments in the meantime, please feel free to email them to us. We will bring it back. Just wanted some type of validation of this before we go into the details.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right.
This,
Hold on. Can we have the full screen? Was that Tammy?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to see us update the affordable housing units to be additional for the next, like, I'd love to see this being a rolling 12 months number, rather than 1,000 units by 2022. I'd also be interested in looking at the public transportation metric that we are using. I think is I'm not sure that that's the right metric. I agree with the strategy. I'm not sure that the metric we're using is the valid metric, and I'd be open to looking at what else we might want to use instead of that if there's something better to use.
And Councilmember Thurm, let me acknowledge, because you and others mentioned this at the strategy session, that we've got some Census Bureau-based numbers that are very backward looking. And we are trying to find better data that is both relevant and more current than some of the figures that we have used in the past.
But I think overall, I would agree that those are our priorities. It's just, you know, how exactly we're defining the measurement that we're going to grade ourselves on.
Okay. If there aren't any other comments.
I like the.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. In the prior year, the bullet with regard to workforce and increasing per capita income, I still think that's a point that we should have. However, I think we should be clear that that's kind of adjusted for inflation, because obviously wages have grown, but so too have costs. And so, you know, real purchasing power and the ability to make ends meet, I think, at least my sense is that that's what, you know, the council was most concerned about when it articulated that several years ago. I think we should retain that.
So will you job opportunities / workforce, something like that, right? Or separately?
Yeah, I think it said workforce in the caption, and I think the caption isn't as important as the actual point. So I think we should keep the point, let's say adjusted for inflation or something to capture that. So it goes to like increasing people's purchasing power and ability to make ends meet, not just, you know, the number in their paycheck.
Okay.
So the only thing I have, and I haven't seen it, so I just saw it on the screen. We talk about affordable housing. I'm becoming more and more concerned about how that is really looked upon. And so to me, it also we need to address housing security, because I think that's what people are looking at as well, avoiding being displaced. So I think all that factors into that. So once I look it through, I'll get with you, but that is another piece of that I think we ought to really be focused on, because things have kind of changed. When we say affordable housing, what does that actually mean for what person? But housing security means we all want to live safe. You know, right now we got people getting ready to be on the street. So, and I think housing security speaks to housing affordability is how I would like to see us really capture it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Sharon, seconded by Mary Kay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.